create an obligation to enforce in appropriate circumstances. Those situations arise either as duties or powers. Duties effectively mean we have no discretion. Power means there's an element of discretion there, whether or not to exercise the power given or not in any given case. The duty or power does not necessarily translate into an obligation to prosecute in every case, as paragraph 4.2 sets out. And this is because as a prosecuting authority, there are a number of different rules which which the lawyers need to take cognizance of in preparing a prosecution file. There is the Code for Crown Prosecutors. There is the Regulators Code. The latter of the two majors, as paragraph 4.2 says, on the provision of advice and education as a means to driving up regulatory awareness within society, so that the essence of the code is that prosecution should only ever be seen as a resort of as a last resort measure. And it means, therefore, that in any given case, there are a number of factors which prosecutors need to take into account in determining the appropriateness or not of action in any given case. And there's a wide variety of circumstances which are taken into account. I think I mentioned in the report a few of them. Antecedents of the subject matter of the action, whether it's a first offense for the individual or whether they are habitual offenders, whether a lesser sanction would be appropriate in any given case, as opposed to proceeding straight off to a prosecution. And all of that is then thrown into the melting pot to give the prosecutor a picture of what is the most appropriate response. And then, in addition to the Regulators Code, we also have the Code for Crown Prosecutors. And yes, we as local authority enforcers are also subject to that code. The code introduces a two-part test, the first being a public interest test and the second an evidential test. The public interest test is one which is undertaken as a partnership between the solicitors, the lawyers undertaking the action, and the enforcement officers who effectively instruct the lawyers. So we'll look at circumstances similar to those I mentioned earlier on under the Regulators Code. Is this person a known offender? Is this a first offense? How serious is it? What's the public interest? How old is the individual? Is this really going to send out the right message to the population? Do we need to send out a warning to the population? So we look at all of that kind of stuff. And ultimately, when you throw all this into the melting pot, it leads you to an assessment that if we take action in this case, then that certainly is in the public interest, because we want to avoid people committing offences of a similar nature, or we may take the view that in the particular circumstances of the case, it's not appropriate and it's not in the public interest because this is the first offence, the person is 70. When you look at the background circumstances of the matter, it wasn't as though there was any particular motive. It was just one of those things that happened. And so you look at such each of those matters and decide in any given case, is there a real public interest in undertaking this prosecution? So you do that, you come to your assessment, you park it to one side. You then also undertake the evidential test. And this aspect of the test is one which is carried out solely by the lawyers. And it's about assessing the nature, the quality of the evidence that the enforcement officers have presented us with, to see whether or not it assists us in presenting a case to the magistrates or the Crown Court, as the case may be, beyond reasonable doubt. Because that is the criminal threshold for all prosecutions. The prosecution must establish its case beyond reasonable doubt. And then I just quickly touch on at, I think it's paragraph 4.5, explaining that there are three types of prosecutions. You have summary offences, you have either way offences, and you also have indictable offences. Indictable offences, local authorities do not have and do not undertake any indictment books. Indictable offences effectively are those which can only be heard in at least the Crown Court and possibly higher, whereas summary offences will always be heard in the Magistrates' Court. Either way offences are those where the court, the prosecutor, i.e. the local authority, and in certain circumstances, the defendant themselves may elect, in appropriate circumstances, that rather than have the matter heard in the Magistrates' Court, they prefer it to be heard in the Crown Court. Ultimately, that decision, though, is made by the bench of magistrates. And then at paragraph 4.6, I just quickly set out for you there a snapshot of some of the regulatory powers which the council exercises as a prosecuting authority. I mean, this list isn't exhaustive. There are a lot more, but it's just to give you a flavor, as I say, and also to show you the variety of different matters that we encounter really on a day-to-day basis, undertaken by my in-house team of 4 prosecutors. At paragraphs 4.7 all the way through to, I think it's 4.10, I just set out some context there. It's to draw out the distinction between prosecutions, which is the remit of this presentation to you today, as criminal action on the one hand, and civil proceedings on the other. The two are very different. With criminal proceedings, I have already mentioned that the threshold, the evidential threshold there, is to establish a case beyond reasonable doubts. With civil proceedings, the threshold is completely different. It's a lot less of a hurdle. It is to establish your evidence on the balance of probabilities. So it's not ever going to be in a civil case that you are saying this person did it. You will be saying that based on the evidence which is presented to you today, it appears more likely than not that this person has done what we say they have done, and on that basis we should succeed and they should lose. As I also said earlier on, criminal matters dealt with either in the Magistrates' Court or in the County Court, at least those matters which we as local authorities prosecute. With civil matters, those take place either in the County Court or the High Court as civil proceedings. And I think, let me just quickly see if there's anything else which I haven't drawn out here. I think, Chair, that covers it. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll probably go onto my camera now so I can do that. Just bear with me a second. I hope you found that useful.
Yes. Just as right, I'll like to open it up to fellow members, if I may, and then can come in and ask a few questions that I've got as well, Olu. So, anybody got any questions for Olu?
I've got some questions, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Stanton, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Olu. It's really interesting. Can you give us a kind of a breakdown of the sort of volumes of work that your team deal with, and across those different areas, and our sort of success rate in this space? I've got a few questions, follow-on questions from that, but I think what I'd like to get an idea of is how active we are and how successful we are at prosecuting in those sort of areas. But if you can just touch on that, and then I might have a couple of follow-ups, if that's okay.
Yes, I'll try to do so. I don't have statistical data to necessarily back it up, but I know that a couple of years ago, when we were transferring our case management system from the old to the new, we worked out that on average we were opening up, I believe it was not far off 1,000 files, prosecution files each year. That's not to say we take 1,000 prosecutions, because like I say, not everything necessarily results in the matter ending up in court. But certainly that's the sort of volume which we are assessing alongside our client services partners on an annual basis. There aren't any real patterns, to be honest. It may be that at certain times, because a school truancy, for example, is big in the news, there is pressure on us to follow suit, and so we might turn our attention to those sort of prosecutions for the next 18 months, and where perhaps last year we may have taken 2, this year we may end up taking 6 or 7, because ultimately prosecutions, they are not self-generating, they are reactive matters, they are reactive claims, and the one thing which you can never do from one year to the next is necessarily guesstimate just how busy you're going to be next year. That's not to say we aren't busy, quite the contrary, we are more than busy, thank you. In terms of success rates, and it depends on what you deem to be success. What I would say as a starting point is we don't lose many, and what is counted as a loss again depends on what has led to it. A loss might arise because well, let me take a step back. With prosecutions, because you have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt, there is no obligation on the opposition to tell you in advance what the substance of their defense is. And so quite often you have to go around the houses and make sure you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, which is different with civil claims, where there is actually an express obligation to share your evidence with the other side, because the whole essence of civil litigation is to see whether or not you can actually settle without the need for a formal court intervention. Hence the saying, which I'm sure most of you have heard, that 95% of civil claims settle on the doorstep. So in the context of succeed and lose, if we're looking at civil claims, for example, if 95% of claims are settled on the doorstep, is that a loss? Is that a win? Not necessarily. It all depends on individual perspective. With criminal matters, like I say, we don't lose a lot. But I couldn't sit here honestly and say to you, I have the statistics. I can get them and share them with you after this meeting if you feel that would help. But they are few and far between. But it's true to say as well that it's the ones that you lose that make the most headlines. And so even if we only lost 4 or 5 in 1 year out of, okay, I mentioned 1,000 earlier on. Let's say we take 600 of those or 750 of those. If we lost 4 or 5, you can bet your bottom dollar that those 4 or 5 will be big in the news. And it doesn't necessarily, as the saying goes, a swallow does not make a summer.
Thanks, Olu. If I may, Chair, I've just got a few follow-ups on that. So I think, so with that in mind, I guess a couple of things. There's always, where as a local authority we fail to prosecute, or it is deemed by the public that we fail to sort of use the full force of the law against things that particularly locally that they feel has been a breach, for instance, as there's always this idea of it sets a precedent that then that means that whether it's a planning thing or a conservation thing or a licensing thing, it makes us look slightly toothless and stuff like that. And I was wondering, is that general? Do we have a strategic steer at any level to say, right, we're really going to clamp down on licensing this year? Is everything entirely reactive, or is the distribution of where we're concentrating and ensuring that we're not sort of we go hard in certain areas? Is there a strategic steer element in that? And the other bit, I guess, to that is, I guess, where does cost come into this? Because obviously, if we're to chase absolutely everything, in what cases can we recoup costs, and in what cases are we actually in a position where we've only got so many dollars and we have to pick and choose which cases we go after, and therefore is cost a factor in terms of a local authority, as all local authorities are, is cash strapped, does that impede our ability to be able to go after people who are breaking the law or not abiding by legislation, because essentially your department has only got so many people, and that means that prioritization conversations have to happen. So I was just wondering, A, the strategic steering, how does that look, or if that happens, and B, how do we take sort of the cost and resource factor into ensuring that we're consistent from year to year? And also, lastly, if you could share some information that you spoke about, after the meeting, just some indicative information. I'm not going to hold you to it. It doesn't have to be madly accurate or anything, but just to have an idea of sort of like the areas in which we've been successful in the last year, and really how that's trended. If you've got that, don't go putting something together, but just if you've got some MI on the back of that, that'd be great.
Okay, let's pick them up in reverse. And no, again, I hand on hand, I don't have that information to those statistics to hand. Again, I can get them for you. I have ideas, but I may be wrong, and in a public setting, it would be wrong to give that sort of a detailed.
Yeah, sorry, Olu. I did mean just sort of you can share those after the meeting at any point.
Yes.
Just share what you've got. I'm not asking you to put anything together or share it at the meeting, but I just wanted to take you up on the offer.
Yeah, no, I can certainly do that, and we can draw that off our case management system fairly easily. So still taking it in reverse, the second issue was about costs. Costs, it depends on whether we are in a criminal, i.e. prosecution setting, or whether we are in a civil claim, civil court setting. With the latter, i.e. civil claims, costs does feature. Cost does play a big part in whether or not a matter should settle. Cost does play a big part in whether or not there is public interest in proceeding with the matter. And therefore, whether it's us, whether it's the other side, the fact that a party may be subject to costs is a major factor. And of course, the more significant the matter is, the more strategic the matter is, the more high profile the matter is, the greater the likelihood of cost consequences. In the civil courts, well, actually in both courts, costs follow the cause. That's what the whoever is successful is entitled to make an application for costs. It then differs slightly because in the civil jurisdiction, subject to putting forward your schedule of costs and justifying it to the judge, if it is challenged, then the judge is obliged to award you all of your costs. In the criminal court, it differs. And it differs to the extent that very rarely do we, as prosecutors, and to the CPS, to be fair, as prosecutors, recover all of their costs following a prosecution. So typically, we would turn up at court, prosecute an offender, and whether it's because we've used our case management system to put a cost to it, or whether it's that plus having got a barrister or whatever it is to fight the matter, we'll put forward a costs bill, a cost request to the magistrate of £3,000. At that stage, what the courts then do in criminal matters is factor in the ability of the defendants to pay. With corporate defendants, if you're looking at things like health and safety prosecutions, or which we've taken, with corporate defendants, we are more likely to get close to, if not all of our costs. But those sort of prosecutions are few and far between. The vast majority tend to be against individuals, and that's when, like I say, the ability to pay gets factored in. So in that kind of example I gave you of a £3,000 to £3,500 cost request, which is typical of our normal cases, it's not unusual to find the court decide, right, haven't taken into account the other side's impecunious position, we'll only award the council, we make another awarding the council £750. which means effectively the public purse loses the balance, and that is that's lawful for the magistrates to do. It's entirely in their discretion, because of course, if the other side are saying we are impecunious and they've proved it, and the courts then say, yeah, notwithstanding all that, we're going to still say you should pay £3,500. The right of appeal for that individual is twofold, not just against the sentence if they choose to challenge it, but also against the order, which includes cost. And so the magistrates are always at pains to show that they've been reasonable in the way in which they approach awards of cost against defendants in criminal cases. We would say sometimes too reasonable, but there's almost like a procedure, a protocol. We accept it. It's not even worth their argument. It's just like you say, yes, from one case to the next, time after time. It's a lot of money, which effectively, potentially, we lose out on because we don't get all of our cost awards as we request them. And that's a shame. I have seen cases where, even with impecunious situations, the judges will take the view that for the guy to have still entered a guilty plea in light of the weight of the evidence against him, it's clear that we wouldn't have spent as much money in prosecuting this matter to the hills had they entered an appropriate plea earlier. So notwithstanding your impecunious position, we're going to award all of the local authorities' cost against you, or 80% of the local authorities' cost against you. We've seen that happen, and it takes a brave judge to do that. And but it rarely ever happens that way. I think the standard force tends to be 50% or less. And now, I've spoken and spoken. I've forgotten what your first question was, Councillor Stanton. Can you just remind me, please?
Yeah, I think it was around the kind of work that, so whether there is any strategic steer to us concentrating as administration, as an authority, for instance, on a particular clamping down on something, and whether that is the case and what form that takes.
I have been here for 18 years, and I have to say that I haven't come across that at Derby. However, I have come across it at previous authorities. So, for example, in the early 90s, I worked for South Kestavine Council in Grantham, and there was a period where a planning enforcement program was authorized by the authority because there was a lot of breach of the advertisement regulations, people putting out A-boards and stuff of that nature. And so in order to set the tone, in order to rein people in order to rein in the excess, they instructed the planners to go out for the next 6 months and effectively prosecute as many A-board offenders as there are to try and drive down the incidence of breach. And it worked. But beyond that 6-month period, then that ended, and then you move on to the next thing. But in Derby, I can't honestly say in my experience, have come across that happening. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. That's my questions.
Right, well done, Councillor Stanton and Olive. I think you wiped out most of my questions there, with the responses. Councillor Noaz, do you have any things that you'd like to ask Olive?
It's not like a question or anything, just a quick thing. You know, how come, when taxi licensing take you to court, like taxi license, drivers take court, and they lose taxi drivers always lose at magistrates court and then go and win at Crown Court. Why is that?
I wouldn't say they always win at the Crown Court. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's about the way in which the matter is challenged. Ultimately, when the matter goes to the magistrates court, we've still got to prove our case, and it may well be the case that because the magistrates are closer to real life prosecutions, taxi prosecutions, because we bring them quite regularly. They are more familiar with the legislation. It's not unusual And it's one of the gripes which my lawyers, if you spoke with them privately, will tell you about. It's not unusual to find that there is less of an appetite for local authority prosecutions by Crown Court judges, because they don't perceive, unfortunately, local authority matters to be real crime. And so that lack of understanding of the detail often doesn't help. I am yet to come across a matter where, even though the defendant has won on appeal, it has turned necessarily on the same facts which were presented at the magistrate's court. So it may be, again, they have a new brief, a new barrister. It may be they've got in more of a specialist person to look at the matter, who throws in something which is entirely new and which was not an issue in the magistrate's court. That's more likely to be the case. And don't forget that when the appeals take place in the Crown Court, in that kind of a situation, it effectively is a full rehearing of the matter. And so it's not that they are appealing what went on in the magistrate's court. They are effectively representing their case. Now, when you look at it from that perspective, having gone through the process once, they know where the strength of the local authority prosecution was, and they know what the weaknesses in their case was. And so, because they don't have to tell us in advance what their case is, you can understand that when it gets to appeal, there's a different nuance which is thrown on the matter, which perhaps we hadn't necessarily prepared for or been aware of, because of the factors I say that they're not obliged to tell us their case beforehand. So there's different matters, and one can speculate as to what the issues are or not. It could also turn on witnesses not turning up. We've had that happen quite often, where we have our views as to why a witness won't turn up, and I don't think it's for me to necessarily lay that speculation open in such an open setting. But all of a sudden, a witness in the magistrate's court who was very vocal, who was very, very clear that they wanted to see justice done, suddenly is not available when we get to the Crown Court. That means we don't have that witness's testimony to present to the Crown Court judge. And like I say, you have to prove your case beyond reasonable doubt. So when you look at it that way, if their testimony was that vital in the mags, and then they are not here in the Crown Court, it means a large chunk of our evidence has suddenly disappeared, just like that. And if it's the evidence is not there, you can't manufacture it. Suddenly we're vulnerable through no fault of our own. So like I said, myriad number of reasons.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nawaz. Councillor McChrystal.
No, I've got no questions, but thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pegg.
No questions. Everything's been covered. Thank you.
Okay. That just leaves me. Like I said, your presentation's good, and I think you've answered most of the questions. So I know we can have a look at this afterwards, Olu, about the statistical data. I did ask for a little sort of, as Councillor Staunton has asked, just a little, some sort of chart, just to see how it goes through. And on the other side, and on balance of finance, right? I don't know how to put this. Them versus us. On finances, who's up and who's down? Right.
Okay. We'll see what we can drop on that. I think it's. I just need to also make the point that with costs, for in particular, one of the other issues which we get is that even when we get a cost award made in our favour, it's not unusual because of people's ability to pay that we've been awarded £1,000 in costs, and because of what the individual has said, the court will order that they repay the £1,000 at the rate of £2 a month. So you can see where I'm coming from with that. That also creates, so it's one thing to say we've got the money. The other thing is, have we actually got the money? And quite often not, because it can take 5-6 years to recover every last penny of it sometimes. And the amount of admin effort which goes into that sometimes does not justify the recovery.
Okay.
But yes, I'll see what I can dig up for you all by way of background data.
Thank you.
Get it
Final
circulated.
one. Also, we get a lot of inquiries around the planning side of things. With permitted development at the moment, we've got, all councillors will go out and have a look at the works that were on the application not meeting the work that's actually been carried out. So obviously the route is to go down to the enforcement officers to go and check that work. How many of these do we get that we can prosecute? Because I know a number that have gone way OTT away from the planning application process under permitted development. Is that a growing part of the work that you're getting?
Honestly, no, it's not. And why that is, in the context of what you've just said, seems odd to me. What the most I can say, because obviously, again, I wasn't aware of the question, and so I haven't been able to speak with the planning conservation officers, but it perhaps goes back to the regulators code and what I said earlier on, that the regulators code makes it very, very clear that the essence of regulation enforcement is not to prosecute, but to secure compliance. Now, what I don't know, therefore, is whether or not they are very successful at getting compliance out of people once the people know the planning team are onto them. I don't know, because I haven't spoken with the planners. That could be it. The other extreme, of course, is that it just goes under the radar and no one does anything about it. Now, that would be a concern, but I'm not saying that's what the case is. I'm just saying it could be it could be either extreme. The reality is it's probably going to be something in between the two.
Yeah. And on other cases that we work on, it's actually classed as a civil matter. Well, clearly the planning application, details are not met. If it depends, planning could be both civil and criminal. Certainly where there is a breach of the legislation. So in that kind of situation, where it is clear that there is a breach of planning law, that is definitely a criminal prosecution. However, if it is the subject of a current or ongoing application or challenge or appeal, then it's a civil matter to the planning inspectorate. So it could fall into both. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. Very comprehensive responses there. You can leave if you so wish. If you don't mind, Chair, I will do, because I support Liverpool and they're playing at 7:45. So, duty calls. Excellent timing. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Cheers, Chair.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Right. Item 6, Democrat Services. Alex, over to you. I do believe you do have a presentation that you put together. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do have a presentation to share with you this evening, so I'll just let Dom load that up for me, if that's okay. He's going to skip through the slides while I refer to my notes. Okay, there we go. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to talk to you tonight about something that I suspect that you might be quite familiar about already, to be honest. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the various services that we offer within the overarching democratic services function of the council. So if we can rattle on through the slides, we'll get going. So yeah, the democracy services, we refer to it, comprises of 3 teams essentially. So two of those teams I suspect you're largely familiar with. The third one perhaps less so. But the first team is the democratic services team, what was formerly known in the old world as constitutional services. So they're my colleagues who provide support to these kind of committees that we're holding this evening, and so they will ensure that these meetings are conducted within the various pieces of statute that govern how local authority meetings are conducted. They'll provide advice on the council's constitution, and they'll ensure that the decisions that committees of the council make are lawful ones. The second team is the Members and Civic Services team. So they are the teams that provide more day-to-day support to councillors. So that includes what we traditionally refer to as member services. It includes the Mayor's office, so that the civic function of the council. And it also incorporates the team of executive assistants who provide support to both the council's chief executive, strategic directors, and also the leader and cabinet members. And then the third element of the democracy service is the school appeals and licensing team. Now, the school appeals team is delivered by our in-house solicitor, Sarah Baines, and that is an independent service that we manage on behalf of the council that affords residents an opportunity to appeal against school places they've been offered by the council as the admissions authority. So although we are also part of the council, we are independent from the council as the admissions authority, and we essentially administer panels which are sat on by a number of volunteer lay people who have no particular connection to the council, who make decisions on whether the school and the admissions authority have followed the appropriate guidelines in issuing a school place to residents. So I'm going to go through each of those teams in a little bit more detail and tell you a few things you probably know already and a few things perhaps you don't. So if you can move to the next slide, Dom. I suspect you'll see some familiar names on this slide. This is our structure. I won't dwell too long on this, but over on the left hand side of the screen we see the Democratic Services team. As I mentioned, that's the team that supports the council's committees and the decision making process. If we move to the next team, please, Dom. In the middle of the screen you'll see the school appeals and licensing team. They're quite a small team, but they're very effective. And then over on the right hand side are the different elements of the Members and Civic Services team. So the first one I'll draw your attention to is what you know as Member Services. So they're the people you go to for your day-to-day inquiries, for support with your casework, for booking surgeries, that kind of thing. And then the other team is the Executive Support Corporate team, and they are the team who provide PA service to Paul Simpson, the Chief Executive, and his team of strategic directors. So that's in the next box. And then also within that we have the Members and Civic Services Officer post, which provides more general support across Members and Civic Services, and also the Mayor's Support Officer post, which is supports the Mayor with managing their diary and liaising with people who want to book the Mayor for engagements. So we'll move on to the next slide, please, Dom. So to go into a bit more detail about what Democratic Services do, so that's the team that the majority of which are on this call this evening supporting our remote meetings. Their main function is essentially to ensure that the timely publication of agendas, reports, minutes in accordance with various statutory requirements that are laid out in different pieces of legislation that date back over a significant period of time. I think perhaps the most substantial piece of legislation we refer to is the Local Government Act 1972, which obviously that was around the time local government was substantially reorganised, and the way council committees were administered didn't really substantially change until perhaps the around about the year 2000, when there was some substantial changes in terms of bringing in the leader and cabinet model, which you'll all be familiar with. So as you know, there are some requirements around the public access and councillor access to agendas and reports and details of decisions that are going to be made prior to those decisions being made, and also requirements to publish minutes afterwards. And we do that through what we now call the Democracy Portal, but perhaps you will know as CMIS. So that's our online, it's part of the council website where we publish all of the information about both upcoming decisions and historic decisions, and that goes back as far as 2002, the decisions we have published on CMIS, or the Democracy Portal. It also includes information about individual councillors, so your contact details for members of the public to access, email address, that kind of thing. It also includes any declarations that you might have made. So if you've made, when you filled out your declarations of pecuniary interest at the start of your terms of office, they're all published on the Democracy Portal. We also publish information about the level of allowances you're paid and things like that. So it's all about open and transparent democracy, I suppose you'd call it. As my colleague Dom is doing tonight, there's always a representative of Democratic Services attending any council committee. They're there on behalf of the monitoring officer, and they're there to provide procedural advice to make sure that the meetings are conducted in line with the committee procedure rules, which form part of our council constitution. They're also there to maintain the council constitution and offer guidance to internal clients on governance and decision making. So quite often services will come to us and say, we've got this decision that needs taking, what's the appropriate avenue, what's the appropriate route for that decision to be taken? More often than not, under our current governance model, it may well be a cabinet decision. Certainly if the financial impact of that decision is above £250,000, it invariably goes to cabinet because it is a key decision and cabinet decide key decisions. Anything with a financial impact of between £100,000 and £250,000 normally decided at an individual cabinet member meeting. So that is still a public meeting, but it is a decision that is taken by an individual cabinet member rather than the cabinet collectively. And then below £100,000, we have that's where delegations to officers start to kick in. So at the top end of that scale, obviously the chief executive is able to make delegated decisions around that level, whereas someone like me, I'd have delegated authority to make decisions a bit slightly lower financial threshold. As well as maintaining and updating the Constitution, that team, they manage the procedure for the consideration of complaints against councillors. So you'll all be familiar with the standards process and the Councillors' Code of Conduct. So my colleague Stephen Mason in particular assists the monitoring officer in going through the process that we have in place for the consideration of complaints against councillors, and there are a number of stages in that process, which I won't go into specific detail unless any councillors particularly interested in me doing so. And as I previously mentioned, we also administer the Register of Councillors' Interests. So that's any declarations relating to interests you might hold as a councillor, financial interests, personal interests, any receipt of any gifts and hospitality, that kind of thing. And we also liaise with the outside bodies and charities that request appointments by the council. So you'll know that at the AGM each year we appoint to a whole range of outside bodies and charities. They are organisations that have approached the council because they would like a councillor appointed to their board quite often, and we will liaise with them and arrange those appointments for the annual meeting. So we can move to the next slide. Just to give you some context about the work of that team, we administer hundreds of public meetings a year. In 2018-19, 161 public meetings, little less in the most recent municipal year, 124. That's largely because, as you'll be aware, in early March we had to suspend a lot of our committee meetings, and I'll come on to that in a little more detail in a moment. We're now back up and running with remote meetings, obviously, but we also administer via that team a number of internal meetings. So on there we have CLT, that's the corporate leadership team. So that's the meeting of the chief executive and their strategic directors. Each week we will assist to compile the agenda and minute those meetings. Also internal committees such as corporate joint committee with the trade unions, as well as corporate health and safety committee. Also, a big piece of work that this team undertook in recent memory is the Council's review of its governance system that you'll be aware concluded in February 2020. And we're currently involved in supporting the independent remuneration panel with the review of members' allowances that is taking place at this moment in time. We've supported the monitoring officer to consider 17 complaints against councillors in the preceding 3 years. That's not to say there have been 17 complaints upheld against councillors. Just to give you a flavour of that, I think in 2018-19 we had four complaints received. 1 was resolved informally and 3 were dismissed. 2019-20 we had a few more, 9 complaints received, 1 informal resolution, 6 dismissed and 2 are ongoing. And then so far this year, we've had 4 complaints received, 1 has been dismissed and 3 are live. So this gives you a flavour of the volume of complaints that we have to process through the councillor complaints procedure. As I mentioned, it come in March, obviously, substantial change to the way that we operate as a team, because as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the way local authority meetings have been administered hasn't changed substantially in a significant period of time. Obviously, it very quickly became apparent that it would be impossible to hold any committee meetings when the pandemic first took hold in March. That's largely because at that time legislation basically meant that to form part of the quorum of a local authority meeting you had to be physically present. So if you couldn't be physically present, then there's no way the meeting could be quorate. So the government, as part of the Coronavirus Act, tabled some new regulations that have allowed meetings to take place remotely, and that's why we're able to have this meeting we're having today. And as you'll be aware, it was a bit of a steep learning curve for a lot of us. We had to draft a new part of the Constitution, so that the remote meeting procedure rules, to take account of some of the peculiarities of holding these meetings via Skype or whatever platform we choose to use in future. We've had to liaise very closely with our colleagues in IT to make sure that we have the software and knowledge available to us to be able to broadcast these meetings. And one of the big challenges we've faced is actually they're a lot more resource intensive than they were previously. Whereas at committee meetings in the past, we would have sent one member of Democratic Services to those meetings to do all the roles. In this meeting tonight, we have Dom, who is fulfilling the normal Democratic Services Officer role, but I also have on the call Karen and Lindsay. Karen is there to essentially deal with any technical issues as they arise, respond to any queries in the live chat, mute microphones when needed. And in the background is Lindsay, who is operating some kit that's been provided to us by IT that allows us to take the feed from this Skype meeting and broadcast it directly to YouTube. So one thing I would say is that since we've moved to remote meetings, we've actually found we've had quite substantial engagement in some of our meetings. You'll know that for the majority of our committee meetings, we might have 1 or 2 people watching. Whilst it's not the case for every single meeting, certainly meetings like council and planning and cabinet, we've been getting 30, 40, 50, and in some cases, I think that the most we've had watching at any one time was around 90 when we had the decision on the landmark building at Planning Control Committee. So as much as these meetings have proved difficult at times, I do think they've offered some benefits in terms of engagement with people. So to move to the next slide, I'll move on to the Members and Civic Services team. So as I mentioned previously, that comprises of it comprised of 3 parts really, the Members and Civic Services team. There's the Executive Support Members team. That's what you perhaps know as member services. So they provide a variety of administrative support to councillors. They're there to support you in terms of investigating and undertaking casework on your behalf, drafting correspondence, diary management for not just for the leader and cabinet members, but also for all councillors. And they'll assist with surgery bookings, arranging children's home visits, booking attendances and conferences and seminars, all kinds of things like that. So they provide an all-round administrative support service, and I hope you'll find that in your experience they're always willing to help. They're a very friendly team. But they're there to support councillors with your day-to-day role as sort of community leaders, I suppose, and assist you with some of the work you undertake in your wards and with residents rather than the committee work that you do. The other part of that team is the Executive Support Corporate team, that they provide a PA service to the Chief Executive and Strategic Directors. Similarly, they draft correspondence, they manage diaries, they administer a number of internal meetings, and they also coordinate responses to Members of Parliament when Members of Parliament's offices writes to the Council, and they coordinate the responses that are provided to public and councillor questions at meetings of Council. Just to give you a flavour of the volume of correspondence that they deal with, we estimated that the Members of the Civic Services team have dealt with over 500 pieces of councillor casework so far this municipal year, and the corporate side of things have dealt with over 286 inquiries from MPs. So quite a substantial volume of work, and sometimes they're not straightforward inquiries. They require a bit of investigative work around the council, speaking to different departments and compiling information to provide a response to MPs or residents or whatever. So if we move to the next slide, please, Dom. We also have the Members and Civic Services Officer role. That is a more, it provides research and project support on behalf of councillors. So if there's something that's piqued your interest that you need a bit more detailed research undertaking, that role is there available to support you. They also administer the Members' Allowances and Expenses scheme. They similarly support with the coordination of councillor and public questions. And they also undertake a range of project work in civic services. So, for example, we have a fairly substantial list of heritage assets, some of them very valuable, in the Mayor's office, and they work to basically make sure they are maintained, documented, regularly valued, and that information is reported to our insurers. They also have a role in coordinating councillor training, so the councillor training days that we hold in the summer and the mop-ups that are going on at the moment. We also have the Mayoral Support Officer. That's a role that is vacant at this moment in time. As you might imagine, during the pandemic, the number of engagements that the Mayor is being asked to attend has fallen substantially, unfortunately. But under normal circumstances, that role will be there to liaise with the people who are booking the Mayor through our online booking form, and coordinate with the contractors that we have who provide a service to the Mayor as the driver or attendant, so they'll go along to engagements with the Mayor. And they also play an important role in coordinating some of the key events in the Civic calendar. So we're looking at events like Mayor Making, Remembrance Sunday. You'll recall the Freedom of the City events that have taken place in recent years. If we move to the next slide. So again, just to give you a few facts and statistics, the Mayor attended 237 engagements in 2019-20. So, you know, that's pretty standard for the Mayor's office, and under normal circumstances, a very active year. Any of you who've been involved in a mayoral year will know that. And obviously, we take a leading role in coordinating some fairly substantial civic events. There's the Mayor Making ceremony, which is perhaps more internally facing, and then we have Remembrance Sunday, which we regularly have over 2,000 members of the public attend the city centre remembrance service. We might have seen the news, unfortunately, towards the tail end of last week, that we have just taken the rather sad decision to not go ahead with a service in the marketplace this year, but we are coordinating a event in combination with the cathedral and the local branch of the Royal British Legion to broadcast a ceremony from the cathedral that members of the public will be able to participate in online. So that's obviously regrettable, but we felt we had no choice under the circumstances. The Mayor's office also has an important role in terms of employee engagement, so they're involved in the Here for Derby Awards and the Long Service Awards. So that's Here for Derby Awards are an internal employee recognition event. The first one took place last autumn, I believe. Long Service Awards, we recognise those employees who've worked for the authority for 40 years or more. And also we run a number of community engagement things. So, for example, last year we had quite a successful Christmas card competition where we asked school children to design a Christmas card for the Mayor, and the Mayor selected his favourite design, which was sent out to various people both in Derby and further afield. We also recognise 100th birthdays and golden wedding anniversaries for residents in the city. I say that the Mayor's office is quite a nice service, I think, and it's we get to be involved in some quite positive work that the council does, and you know it's also nice to be involved in a service that in a part of the service that dates back to 1835 in its present form, but you know there have been mayors of the city of Derby since 1638, so it's an office that is almost 400 years old. So you know it's a really positive part of the council, I think. So to move on to the next slide, to cover school appeals and licensing, as I mentioned earlier, we manage an independent school admission and exclusion appeal service that's managed by an in-house solicitor, Sarah Baines, and also her colleague Jackie Waring. They administer independent school admission appeals in line with the National School Admission Appeals Code. It's independent of the council as the admissions authority, and it offers parents an opportunity to present their case in front of a panel of lay people. Those panels are comprised of people they're all civic-minded people who volunteer a lot of their time to the council, but a number of them are required to have a background in education matters. So a lot of them are retired teachers. So we have a cohort of around about, I think probably about 10 or 12 panelists who give up a lot of their time to the council to hear these appeals. And we also have a fairly healthy sold service to academies and free schools across the city. Now, in times gone by, obviously the council would have provided this service to maintain schools as part of the overall package of support services that we provided to schools. Now, with academies and free schools, then they then have to purchase in those services, and there isn't anyone else really offering that kind of service in the vicinity. So we actually have quite a healthy income from schools and academies in the city from delivering their appeals service for them. The other element of this team is that they administer the licensing committee and regulatory subcommittees in liaison with colleagues in the licensing department and legal services. There's quite a lot of parallels between the way regulatory subcommittees have to be administered and the way that school appeals have to be administered. There's obviously a focus on considered and appropriate decision making, and so we feel there is some direct comparison to be drawn. So we've brought those two functions together within one team. So if we move to the next slide, please, Dom. Again, just to give you an idea of the volume of work that team undertakes, you'll see that we in some years we hear over 1,000 school admission appeals, which normally means that that Sarah or one of her colleagues is in appeal hearings at least one day a week, if not more. There's an ebb and flow to the way those appeals are heard. So we have certain times of the year where there is a substantial volume of appeals, normally around the springtime when people are appealing for places for the next academic year. For our most popular schools, we'll hold what we call block appeals, where a number of parents will come in and have their appeal heard, the first stage of their appeal heard at the same time, and then the panel will decide whether that appeal is to progress to the second stage, where the parent presents their case to the panel, and then those appeals will be heard individually. As I mentioned, we contract with 29 academies or academy trusts to administer their appeals service, and we do also provide advice on individual cases on an ad hoc basis. We also have a role in exclusion appeals as well. So when a child has been excluded from a school, we sometimes take on work on behalf of Nottingham City Council for that as well, when a conflict of interest arises. Similarly to colleagues in democratic services, that team's seen substantial changes to the way the service operates as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Again, there have been legislative changes brought in that have allowed remote hearings to take place, but they do present some really substantial practical challenges. Now, a lot of the parents that submit appeals are not necessarily familiar with or have access to the IT equipment to enable them to participate in a Skype meeting or equivalent. So actually what we're having to do is hold a lot of telephone-based appeals or written appeals, and they are certainly in the case of written appeals, they're a lot more time consuming because there's a process whereby they will submit their evidence, the panel will send questions back to them, then they will answer their questions, and the school will similarly ask questions. So it's quite an involved, time consuming process. Similarly, telephone appeals are quite challenging to administer, and so we have had a bit of a backlog in recent months with dealing with school admission appeals. Fortunately, the government have removed the timescales for hearing a lot of those appeals, and we are by no means alone in that problem. It's an issue that is presented itself across the country. But credit to that team; they've done an incredible job in recent months to get on top of that backlog. And actually, we're in a really positive position now, whereas maybe a couple of months ago we were really feeling the pressure from that backlog of appeals. Obviously, it's an emotive subject for parents, and I'm sure that they're the kind of things that have come into your inboxes as counsellors on regular occasions, parents who've been going through the school admission appeals process. So to move to my final slide, just to touch very briefly on elections. I think you've heard from Mick Stein, the elections manager, previously about the way we administer elections at Derby City Council. The elections team are not structured within democratic services, but they are part of the wider legal procurement and democratic services department that Emily Feenan is the director of. And essentially the way things work is that quite often in the run-up to an election, certainly when we go into the purdah period, the work of the teams in my service starts to have a natural decline, and obviously the work in the elections team picks up. So we will all sort of decamp and take up different roles, supporting Mick and his elections team to deliver those elections. So, for example, colleagues in democratic services are responsible for management of the postal vote processing, preparation and checking of ballot books and equipment that's provided to polling stations, the planning and organisation of the count venue for elections. So actually Mick's small team balloons in numbers in the weeks prior to an election, and we'll all go and work for him essentially for a few weeks of each year. So just to conclude, obviously, if you are interested in any of the elements I've touched on in this presentation, happy to answer any questions now, and of course also of course speak to you outside of the meeting. Some general resources available there. The Democracy Portal is the main port of call for any information you require on decisions, agendas, reports, minutes, that kind of thing, information about councillors, declarations that have been made. That applies equally to yourselves as councillors, but also any members of the public watching this meeting this evening. There are some go-to documents for decision-making guidance. So the council constitution, obviously, we're perhaps more familiar with the council constitution than any other part of the council. So if you have questions about what's included in the scheme of delegations or the committee procedure rules, we are there to support you with that. And then there are some other key documents. Again, some of them form part of the constitution. So the councillor's code of conduct, working together, which is what used to be the member officer protocol, essentially. So it is the protocol for effective relationships between councillors and officers. And then my final slide is just some key contacts. So there you have Emily, who you'll all know, the Director of Legal Procurement, Democratic Services and Monitoring Officer. There's myself, the Acting Head of Service, and then the 3 service managers, which is Karen, who's on the call this evening, Jodie, who manages the Members and Civic Services team, and Sarah, who manages the School Appeals team. So with that, Chair, that's my presentation concluded, and happy to take any questions.
Excellent presentation, Alex. Thank you, and very informative. Well, we'll go straight into questions if there's any. We start, Councillor Nawaz, any questions for Alex?
Not yet. Carry on. I'll come back to you.
Okay, Councillor Stanton.
I guess one small question, but I guess first, just, I mean, you know, Alex, that was a comprehensive, if not exhaustive, presentation. A really good job. So absolutely amazing, and I think that probably is just testament to how thorough, you know, not just you, but as a team you guys are, and some of those numbers in the amount of sheer volume of work that you guys do to support this council, and working with probably some of the most difficult people in councillors in actually trying to get us to the right place at the right time and not break the law in the process is absolutely amazing. I guess 2 small questions. One is, how do you given the fact that we've moved to remote working, do you see that sort of maintaining after we sort of go back, or do you think it's a case of we'll be back in the office? Because I think in some ways, as you said, it's been frustrating, and in other ways, I think it has led to probably a wider participation by the public, and probably a better ability for even councillors to be able to be more flexible about their ability to attend meetings. So I'd be interested to get your view on that. And lastly, just on that diagram with the positions, there were at least 3 positions I think I spotted which were still acting. I think they've been in that position for some time. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm just wondering what's holding that up, and how do we get to a point where they're no longer acting, but actually permanently in those positions. But other than that, just carry on the fantastic work you guys always do.
Thanks, Councillor Stans. That's really kind. Yeah, I completely echo your comments that it's a fantastic team, and it's very hard-working people who obviously I think believe in what they're doing, and obviously there to support you as councillors and the democratic process generally. Just to pick up on your first point, I think that from a technical perspective, the legislation that allows the remote meetings to take place is due to expire in next May. So actually the law will return to what it was before without some further intervention from the government. However, a lot of the feedback that's been coming from some of our professional organisations, so for example the Association of Democratic Services Officers, Centre for Public Scrutiny, people like that, they are actively pushing for an extension of these powers that allow these remote meetings to take place. And I think there has been quite a substantial, there's been a lot of reports that have come out in recent years about how we improve access to democracy, how we encourage more people to want to stand to become councillors. And a lot of it has been about affording greater flexibility for people to fit their roles and responsibilities as a councillor around the complicated situations that people find themselves in their lives, whether that's work, whether that's family, caring responsibilities, that kind of thing. And I think out of something that is obviously so difficult and has been traumatic for so many people, I actually think it affords a real opportunity to address some of those problems, because, as you say, these meetings allow people to more to shape their role as a councillor around the complexities of their life. And I would certainly support an extension of the of those regulations. That is not to say that there haven't been teething problems, and I think there are some things that we can do to make these meetings a little bit more straightforward and make and provide yourselves as councillors with the support that you need to ensure that you're as effective as possible in these meetings. But broadly speaking, I think they offer remote meetings offer an enormous opportunity. And to be honest, I think where we're likely to head is towards hybrid meetings. They're not possible at this moment in time, largely due to the public health situation, but also due to the sort of technical challenges that they present in terms of the infrastructure that you need in place in meeting rooms for them to be successful. But I think where we will end up is we will have the majority of a committee attending in the council house, and then those councillors who might be unable to make it into the building at that particular time or have other responsibilities, they could participate remotely, and the technology that's available within the meeting room would allow that to take place seamlessly. That technology exists at the moment, and it is being fitted into the council house at this moment in time into certain meeting rooms, and I think there is an ambition to expand that further. So I think we'll have to see where it leads. At this moment in time, remote meetings are here to stay, and that's the advice that we've been given by organisations such as the LGA. I know that I'm very sympathetic to those who were keen to get back into the council house, because I know that councillors didn't get elected to participate in meetings online. But it's the situation at this moment in time makes it very difficult. So I think we should prepare ourselves for these remote meetings to continue well into the new year, if I'm being honest. To address the second question, probably not one for me to answer, unfortunately. Those acting up arrangements have been in place for about a year and a half now. I know there is an ambition to, I say ambition, there are active moves afoot to resolve that situation, but it's probably one to ask my director about, really. Obviously, there are 3 acting positions that stem down from my own as head of service, and so once that situation is resolved, then obviously we'd look to appoint permanently to the posts that sit below my own in the structure, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stanton. Councillor Pegg.
No question. Just thanks, Alex, for a very interesting and comprehensive report. Thank you.
Councillor Bristol.
No questions from me. And again, thank you, Alex, for the comprehensive report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Finally, Councillor Nawaz, have you anything you'd like to ask Alex?
No. Thanks for all your support. Thank you, Alex.
Yes, Alex. Just on the appeal side, I know we have had quite a bit of a backlog. Are we on top of that now, Alex? I know you touched on it. There's a few been outstanding, and I know the piles have been building up. I've had a couple of cases that have been wanting to be looked at, but maybe we can sort of just have a look at that outside the meeting.
Yeah, I'd be happy to provide you with some more facts and figures when I have them at my disposal outside of the meeting, Councillor Nater. But from my perspective, we are compared to where we were 2 to 3 months ago, we're in a much better position. It was quite difficult getting the the processes for hearing these, they're quite complicated cases quite often, which rely on, they're emotive, they rely on parents presenting evidence about their child's situation. They involve a number of different parties, and they're quite complex to administer remotely. And so it was taking a long time to get through the initial appeals. But I think the team have got themselves into a position now. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are still very difficult to administer. And when the public health situation allows, we will be reverting to holding those appeals physically, because I don't think they necessarily afford. They don't afford a telephone appeal doesn't afford the same opportunity for the panel to assess the effect that a particular decision has had on a parent, or the reasons why a school might not be able to provide a school place. I think it's difficult to sometimes get that across on the telephone, and I think that the team will be quite keen to move back to physical appeals when the situation allows. But from my perspective, yes, we're very much on top of the backlog now. They've done an incredible job to get through it in the last probably last eight weeks in particular, and happy to provide some figures about the lead-in time after the meeting.
Just on the people that sit on the panels, I mean, I've been to a few of them in the past, not for a while now. They are volunteers and do a sterling job, and very professional with it. You don't always get what you want, but they do work hard. They work together and are very compassionate about what decisions they make. Other than that, Alex, I just want to say, touching on what everybody else has said, your team and the officers that deal with it, thank you very much for your support, especially through these difficult times. Just on reflection of your presentation, just goes to show how much work that does go off on the back, and the statistical evidence sort of proves that as well. So thank you very much for that, much appreciated.
No problem. I really appreciate those words, Chair, and I'll be happy to pass those back to the team. And obviously, we quite enjoy working with councillors as well. It's it's why we do it.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Right, moving on. The work programme is attached, and we'll take it as it's seen. And what we can do, we can have another meeting to have a look at what things want adding on. And members, if you got anything that you got that you want putting onto the work programme, looking at previous things that we've sort of done, please feel free to get in touch with myself or Dominic, and we can go through that. I think under the current circumstances, Dominic, it would be not right to have any topic reviews under the current situation. It's only going to take up more officer time, and I think the presentations that we've received from our officers have been excellent. If you want to add anything to that, Dominic, more than happy.
Yeah, as you said, Chair, we've got a few items on the agenda for the January meeting, and then if things crop up between now and then, we've got a few spaces for the March meeting, so there's plenty of room for us to add any items that members of the board would like to scrutinise. Thank you.
Okay, on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thanks, Chair.
Cheers.
Thanks, Chair. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.